Peter Griffin is one of the most outrageous characters on television. The big guy has done every insane thing imaginable, from being a pirate to having explosive fights with a chicken. So I thought it'd be fun to dive into Peter's entire life, from his birth all the way to his death, as well as everything else in between. We'll also look back on how he met Lois, examine his relationship with his children.
Shut up, Meg.
And see if Peter really is a family guy.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
I'm Lydia from Screen Portal, and this is the complete Peter Griffin timeline. And before we begin, it's important to note that just like The Simpsons, Family Guy exists in a floating timeline. And for a show that's been going on for over 2 decades, there is naturally going to be some inconsistencies with ages, characters, and plot points. So please remember that this is just for fun, and I've done my best to make a cohesive summary of his entire life. So now we've got that out of the way, let's begin. The birth of the big guy. So let's start at the very beginning. Peter Griffin was born not in the United States, but in Mexico. His mother crossed the border in order to terminate her pregnancy, but she left it just a little too long, and Peter popped out like a piñata. As he was born in a different country, and because his mother didn't fill out any paperwork, Peter was technically an illegal immigrant. Later on in life, when Peter's nationality is revealed, he is fired from his workplace. Now jobless, he is forced to work under his tyrant father-in-law, Carter Schmidt. Living with his fellow Mexican immigrants on the estate, he is forced to work under very harsh conditions, and so Peter leads a rebellion against his cruel boss. And to save his ass, Carter decides to negotiate with Peter, saying that he will grant him American citizenship if he calls off the rebellion. And so Peter does, and he then becomes an official American citizen. After Peter was born, Thelma married Francis, a strict Irish Catholic. And for the longest time, Peter believed that he was his real father, despite Francis telling him otherwise.
Happy Father's Day, Dad!
I'm not your father.
And Francis was very strict with Peter growing up and disapproved of his decisions. In a bid to gain his father's approval, Peter shows off by drunkenly riding a unicycle but lands on top of his stepfather. And Francis's final words were,
"You're a fat, stinking drunk."
Peter would then bury him at the pet cemetery, but as you'd expect, it didn't go very well. After his death, it's revealed that he wasn't Peter's biological father after all. It turns out that his mother had a fling with an Irish drunk named Mickey McFinnigan. And Peter would soon head over to Ireland to meet his real father. And despite Mickey proudly declaring that Peter really is his son, we haven't seen him since.
Welcome to my family, Peter.
Peter's childhood. Peter, for the most part, seemed to have had quite a great childhood, except for the time when he jumped into a van thinking he'll get free candy. When he was 6, his little sister Karen was born, and the two had a very estranged relationship, as Karen would often bully Peter, which extended into their adulthood. Karen is a professional wrestler, and sick of being picked on, Peter would challenge her to a match. She easily takes him on, but before Karen chokes him out, he is rescued by Meg, which is pretty nice considering all the awful things he's done to his daughter. Aged 18, meeting Lois. During high school, Peter worked a summer job as a towelboy at the Newport Country Club. And this is where he meets Lois for the very first time, and they go on a date, and he woos her with his tummy impressions. This obviously works, and therefore leads them to make love in the middle of a busy road, and causing a truck to overturn and the driver to be carried off by wolves. Oh, so romantic. Although they seem like total polar opposites, it does make sense why Lois would find Peter attractive. Lois grew up in a rigid elite environment with a cold and distant father with stringent rules and expectations. So Peter's outrageous behaviour was refreshing to her. He was outside of her normal social circles and was reckless, fun, and didn't care what anyone thought, making him stand out against the crowd. Lois would take Peter to meet her father, Carter Schmidt, and it's an understatement to say that they didn't hit it off. Carter knocked Peter out and dumped him in the middle of the ocean. And it was around this time where a warship passes and the sailors mistake Peter for a manatee, capturing him for soup. And funnily enough, this is where he meets Quagmire for the very first time.
Ensign Glenn Quagmire, welcome aboard.
His future neighbor would take him to the bar to go and meet women, but Peter is way too lovesick, so sets off to find Lois. And on his way back to meet her, he meets Cleveland, who offers to give him a lift. Peter finally makes it back and confronts Carter, who then tried to bribe Peter with $1 million to stay away from his daughter.
Lois may be worth $1 million to you, but to me, she's worthless.
And after being reunited, they go to a dance together where Peter proposes. However, this almost never happened due to some very Back to the Future style hijinks, but that's another story. Now, it wouldn't be a Peter Griffin video if we didn't talk about the origins of his beef with Ernie the chicken. During the prom, Peter accidentally bumped into the giant chicken. The chicken would finally get his payback when he gave Peter an expired coupon, leading on to an all-out fight between the two. The chicken fight is one of the longest running gags in the show and results into some massive action set pieces. The two would bludgeon each other across town, leaving a path of destruction in their wake. At one point, the two would even make amends and become friends. But when it looks like that their feud would finally be over, they squabbles over the bill at a very nice dinner, and an all-out brawl ensues yet again. Later on, when volunteering as a nurse at the hospital, Peter finds that Ernie is on his deathbed. It's here that Peter realizes that he needs the giant chicken in his life. His rival gives him something to live for. And when Ernie dies, it's Peter who brings him back to life. He admits that the chicken helps complete him, but also saved him because he would be solely responsible financially for the damages caused by their previous fights. By the way, if you're enjoying the video, then I'd really appreciate it if you took the time to subscribe to the channel. It lets YouTube know that you like my videos and promotes the channel to more and more people, so thank you so much. Anyway, back to the video. Peter and Lois's wedding. Peter, Cleveland and Quagmire are now roommates and living in New York, while Lois and Bonnie lived across the hall. Sounds familiar? Peter and Lois are very on and off at this point, but he still has very deep feelings for her. And despite already proposing a couple of years ago, Peter pops the question yet again.
I'm already engaged to Tom Tucker.
But not willing to give up, Peter makes Lois a mixtape and she calls off the engagement. And not wanting his daughter to end up with someone like Peter, Carter attempted to sabotage their relationship by paying Daisy Fuentes to kiss Peter, which Lois sees on live TV.
Peter, how could you?
Lois then agrees to marry Tom Tucker again, but before she can say yes, Peter bursts into the church and pleads for her to come back. She agrees and Peter fights his way out of the church, beating up her family along the way, and elopes to Fenway Park Baseball Stadium. Lois did have her reservations about the marriage, but she was already pregnant with Meg at the time, so may as well. So let's talk about Lois's and Peter's turbulent marriage. Despite having some very sweet moments, I think it's pretty safe to say that their marriage is a pretty rocky one.
I haven't been attracted to Lois for 1.5 years.
Lois is often the voice of reason in their relationship, although Peter only sees her as a nag. But come on, to be fair, Lois has put up with a lot of crap over the years, dutifully standing by her husband while he does stupid, dangerous stunts and spending their entire life savings on ridiculous things like the Petercopter. The two have stated several times how they feel stuck in their marriage and have even contemplated separating on more than one occasion.
Maybe we should think about getting it.
It is what it is. Let's just get Stewie to college and go from there.
And while they do share some tender moments, they are, for the most part, few and far between. It's not like Homer and Marge's relationship that, despite its many troubles, you can still tell that they are each other's soulmates. But I'm not sure you can say the same about the Griffins. Lois and Peter always seem to be screaming at each other. They do love each other and have obviously made a family together, but it's probably not the healthiest relationship. Present day, Peter is a family guy. Peter and Lois have 3 children together, Meg, Chris and Stewie. There was also Peter Jr., but let's not get into that. And let's face it, Peter is a pretty terrible dad and maybe the worst father on TV ever. And the victim to a lot of his bullying is his very own daughter.
Is somebody downstairs?
And sure, the whole family treats Meg like crap, but none more so than Peter. He constantly tells his daughter to shut up and even sold her for marriage to the Goldman family. However, over the years, the relationship has improved somewhat. He protected his daughter from school bullies, and in turn, she saved him from that wrestling match and rescued him from North Korea. Peter has also fathered many other children as a donor. Later on, his biological children would track him down, revealing that Peter has dozens of children across the world. Now, taking a look at his career path, it's safe to say that he's had a whole lot of eclectic jobs. He originally worked at the Happy-Go-Lucky toy factory and was responsible for quality control, but after accidentally killing his boss, Mr. Weed, Peter becomes unemployed. So he becomes a fisherman for a short while, before landing a job in Pawtucket Patriot Brewery. Although this has been his main job throughout the series, he was also a centre for the New England Patriots, before his showboating got him kicked off the team. He was a sheriff, Renaissance knight, sumo wrestler, and erotic author, and was even the Grim Reaper at one point. He is perhaps one of the only characters who could give Homer Simpson a run for his money on the breadth of his breadwinning. Peter's oldie years. When Stewie finds his future counterpart in San Francisco, he hitchhikes his way 30 years into the future. Now, we will explore Stewie's timeline in a future video, but in the meantime, let's catch up with the rest of the Griffin family. Chris is a cop married to a very bossy woman named Vanessa, and Meg is now a man.
My name is Ron.
Vanessa bullies Chris and Ron into putting their parents into a retirement home, and at first they are pretty reluctant, but when Chris informs them that they will have their bums wiped for them, Peter is all in.
You gotta be yanking me. That is sweet.
But it's not so bad at Quahog Acres retirement home, as Peter's buddies are there, and Joe even has new legs. However, this is just one possible timeline, as Stewie would go back in time and alter history, but it's still entirely possible that this all happened without any involvement from Stewie. Peter's death. One other alternative future is in the season 18 episode Rich Old Stewie. In the future, Stewie is filthy rich and living in California. When Brian informs him that Peter is dying, they travel to Quahog to say goodbye. When they arrive back in town, they find Peter on his deathbed, and Peter's dying wish is for Stewie to look after the family when he's gone. And with that, after feebly dancing to his favourite song Bird is the Word, he passes away. Or does he? It turns out that it was all a ruse to obtain Stewie's enormous wealth. But ever the genius, Stewie knew their diabolical plan all along, and always one for having the last laugh, he blows up the house with his entire family inside. However, it turns out that this was all in Stewie's mind while trying to pick out an old man Halloween costume. So of course this most likely didn't happen, but it's interesting to see them all a bit older. And wow, there we have it. That is the complete Peter Griffin timeline. And as the show continues for another 20 years, this will no doubt change with the times. So what is your favourite Peter Griffin moment? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and see you soon.